Hi everybody, welcome to another of the masterclass series from Not Actively Looking. My name's Anthony. I'm joined today by Rena, who will introduce herself in a minute. We're talking today about calm and clear thinking in challenging times. So before we kick off, let me just cover a couple of the housekeeping points, quite useful. So Rena and I will introduce ourselves in a minute. We'll then do the masterclass. So it's an interactive session. We'll ask you to get involved. There's a Q&A function, so if you want to contribute or you want to ask a question, please do that via the Q&A button. If you have a question and for some reason we haven't answered it during the session, what we'll do is we'll try and find a couple of minutes at the end to do that. At the end of the session, it'll be recorded, it'll be available on the Not Actively Looking website. We always appreciate your feedback, so please give us your feedback. And if you follow us on LinkedIn, you can keep up to date with any other sessions that we've got going. So if you're not following us yet on LinkedIn, please do that. Okay, so my name is Anthony Harling. I'm the founder and director here at Not Actively Looking. I've been in the executive search world for quite a long time, as you can see. I've been about 30 years. So I still do a little bit of executive search, but my main activity is running Not Actively Looking. And Rena, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Rena and I work as an executive coach with the Pragma Group. And really we specialise in working, we're a global coaching business that works with executives, leaders, teams, and we specialise in enabling people to, through an understanding of the mind and how that works, really transform every level of how they think and operate. And what often that does is sort of release a whole load of resourcefulness and well-being for people that impacts the bottom line as well.
Super. All right, thank you. Let's kick on. Okay. So this is the topic. Over to you, Rena.
Yeah, so if I just sort of say a bit about what we're going to be doing in today's session. So as Anthony said in the beginning, you know, we're going to try for this to be as interactive as it can be, so that you get the most benefit out of it. And so what we're going to do today is give you an introduction into the mind work that we do. Obviously all we have today is 90 minutes. Usually we spend sort of 2 or 3 days on this, so it'll just be a little glimpse into it, but hopefully what you'll get to experience is some insights and some realizations for yourself about how your mind works, and that will hopefully enable you to have clearer thinking, feel more calm, regardless of what's going on in the outside world in circumstances or situations. So that's kind of what we'll be doing today. And actually in that, what we'll be doing is exploring a bit about, well, what is it that enables us as human beings to either feel quite calm and have clear thinking and feel quite grounded and just be okay and resourceful, versus what is it that almost gets in the way of that and prevents that from happening. So we're going to, you know, we invite you to use the chat at different points, and we'll keep an eye on that and answer as we go along, but also we can take some questions towards the end. So Anthony, would you mind just clicking on to the next slide, please? Thank you. I'm just going to pause for a second because I'm having a bit of viewing issue and I can't actually see the screen.
Okay. So before we start, these are your 2 questions, Rena. So yes. You're asking us to use the chat function to answer these questions. Is that right?
Yes, please. So, so there are a couple of questions. So firstly, it'd be great to hear from people. Yeah, so if you could maybe just put a few words in the chat to say a bit about what your state of mind is at the moment, and also what your biggest challenge is right now. That'd be great, thank you.
Can you access the comments there?
Okay, so yes, I can now. So so we're seeing a few different sort of things come up here. So some people are feeling a bit frustrated. There are some challenges around trying to prioritize different needs. So it sounds like there are some of you who are obviously working from home now and trying to homeschool and keep the home going as well. Frustration with leadership in the country. Some of you are feeling quite calm and balanced now. Some people struggling from being in front of the computer all day. Obviously, there is also some concerns about the future and job security and employment and kind of what's going to happen going forward. Okay. So there's obviously some variation. Some people are perhaps feeling a little bit more grounded and optimistic. Others might be finding that they're feeling a bit challenged by everything that's going on. And then I'm sure for some individuals, well, probably for everyone, I would say, myself included, that there's also variability, and that there might be some days when we're perhaps feeling a bit more optimistic, and we kind of, things just don't seem quite so bad, and then on other days it can look quite different. So thank you for sharing that, everyone. What I'm going to do now is just have just spend a few minutes giving you an indication as to kind of where we're going on the call in terms of the level at which we're going to be exploring the mind, because there are lots of different ways we can do that. Anthony, if you would mind just popping to the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Lovely.
So as I was saying, there are different levels, I guess, of understanding the mind. And this little diagram here indicates a stream. And what we've got at the bottom of the stream is what we're calling the content. So that's downstream, we've got the content of the mind. And what we mean by that is the different experiences that we have on a moment by moment basis. So, there will be thoughts that come into our minds about all sorts of things. So I feel frustrated, or I'm worried about the future, or what am I going to have for dinner tonight? I feel happy, I feel sad, I feel cold, I can see a dog across the road. So that's what we're classing as the content of the mind. And that's very much about what we experience what we actually experience in any moment. And we're not going to be focusing on that level of the mind in this masterclass today. What sits upstream of the content of the mind is what we're calling our programming. And what that means is that for all of us, there are different experiences that we've had in life, our habits, where we grew up, what jobs we've had, all of those cumulative experiences in our lives that go towards creating, I guess, what we might view as perhaps our personality or some of our traits and habits. And some of you may have done things in the past, like completed, for example, an MBTI or a DISC profile, or there might be, you may have done like a colour thing where it tells you whether your personality is a red or a blue or a green. And all of those things can be really helpful. And in a way, the programming tells us the why. So why is it that we think what we think? Why do we have the content of thinking that we do? Again, we're not going to be looking at that level today. So we're not looking at the why, we're not looking at the what. We're going to be focusing on an area that we don't usually really focus on very much. And that is really what sits at the top of the stream, so completely upstream at the source, is what I would describe as the mechanics. So what I mean by that is the functionality of the mind. So how does the mind actually work? And when we start to understand the nature of the mind and how it functions, the how, what tends to happen is that there are benefits, and a lot of the downstream programming, habits and content of the mind seems to clear up. So if I have some habitual thinking about, you know, if I'm a worrier, for example, or I find myself getting frustrated easily, through understanding the nature of the mind and how it works, that can directly impact the downstream content. So that's just to set the scene a little bit, and hopefully that makes sense as a good place to start. So what I'd like to do now is just do a little experiment. Anthony, if you wouldn't mind clicking through to not the next slide, but the one after. That's it. So if everyone would like to just take a few moments just within yourself to, and actually before you do that, if you're holding anything, I invite you to just put anything down that you're holding, feet on the floor, and just kind of really get present where you are now and what you're doing. And if you can just recall a time, and if it feels comfortable, you can close your eyes. So think of a time when you were in flow or really feeling quite peaceful inside. Another way of saying that is that it might be that you were feeling like you were in the zone. So if you can just connect to that time, think of a time when you were feeling that. And actually go there now and be in that moment right now. So get into that experience now and remember what it was like. So what did it feel like? And what qualities were enabled in you? So when you were feeling really peaceful and grounded, in flow or in the zone, how resourceful were you? And what did it feel like? And then if you could share some words in the chat and just let us know what that was for you. So we've got peaceful, smiling, light, confidence, able to engage with others and communicate well, feeling on top of my game. Energetic, Andy says thank you. Energized. And so what else did that enable in you? Oh, Anthony, so it felt natural. Confident. So another question to you all. Obviously, I asked you to remember that time and think of that. Glenn's saying that there was clarity of thought. Thank you, Glenn. So another question, obviously I asked you to, you know, to connect to that time and to think about that, and then you chose what to think about. But if you think back to the time that you were, you know, when you experienced this in the first place, those qualities that you've just put into the chat, so we've had a few more around assurance, powerful, free. Did those feelings or qualities, where did they come from? How did they show up? So were they something that you did, or did they simply show up within you? So if you could just put some answers in the chat, that would be great. So where did these qualities and these feelings come from? Did you do anything to make them happen, or did they just show up in your mind? So we've got, they seem to come out, displayed, from within me, responding to a peaceful scene, running in the countryside, on yoga retreat, felt good in my own skin, came from focus, concentration, I was well prepared, not much effort needed. Okay, that's great, thank you. And I think what's interesting about this is that, so we've asked, we've run this experiment, if you like, with probably thousands of people across the globe. And what's really interesting is that whoever we ask, we always get the same types of responses. So sometimes the words might vary, but everyone seems to come up with very similar feelings and kind of attributes and qualities. And everyone also seems to agree that often they just show up, or they just come through us, so to speak. Now, what's interesting is, so a few of you have said, you know, so for example, has maybe said that you were doing something while it happened. So for example, I was on a run, and it was peaceful outside, or I was really focusing or concentrating hard on something, and that seemed to make it happen. Now what's interesting, and what we often do, is we attribute the feeling and what's available in us to the circumstance or the situation. And so I'll give you an example of that. I remember running a program not too long ago, and one of the clients was working in the banking sector, but he was also a keen fencer, and would play at quite a high level, sort of semi-professional. And so he kind of realized that there was a time where he could, when he was actually at his best and he was on his game, that a lot of these qualities that you guys have put on the chat were present within him. Now, he thought that the reason that those qualities came up was because of the things that he was doing beforehand that enabled him to be calm, clear thinking, you know, being able to kind of respond to what was going on in the match in a calm and clear way. So he started to formulate and have a whole host of rituals that he would go through in order to get himself into that space. Now, the problem with that is that sometimes that would work. So sometimes he would go through all the rituals before a match, and then he would be, I'll call it, in flow during the match. And sometimes he would complete those rituals and he wouldn't be. And it really confused him as to what the difference was, and why sometimes that was the case and why sometimes it wasn't. And equally, and I don't know, perhaps some of you might be able to relate to this, you know, sometimes when we're out on a run, or we're doing yoga, or we're playing golf, or we're cooking, or we're doing something like that, we can feel like we're really in flow and everything's just effortless. And yet there'll be other times when we're on the same kind of run and doing the same sort of activity, but it's not the same. Now, that variability points us to the fact that actually it's not the thing that we're doing, it's not the situation, it's not the circumstance, but there's something else going on that's enabling us to be, you know, feeling calm, present and clear. And that's what we're going to be looking at and digging deeper into during this session. Because there is something behind that in the mind that enables that to happen in quite a natural way. So the next thing to do is, I'm also going to ask you, so Anthony, if you could just go back one slide. I'm going to do another little experiment. So if you could all think of a time when there was a fairly substantial change that has taken place in your life, either for you, or if you can't think of anything for yourself, you know, someone you know. And the question is, what was the one thing that was present for that to happen? So what was the thing that almost caused the transformation or the change to happen and to actually be sustainable, so for it to stick? So just spend a minute thinking about that, and then if you wouldn't mind putting some answers in the chat, that would be great. Well, it doesn't necessarily, so I've got a question here, do you mean a positive change? It doesn't necessarily need to be a positive change, but often that's what people will think of. So whether it be you stopped smoking, or yeah, so something that changed. And yeah, I guess maybe for the purpose of this example, yeah, think of something that was a positive change in your life. So if you think of a positive change that was sustained, what was the one thing that actually caused that made that happen and stick? Okay, thanks, Ralph. So you've said the acceptance of a previous negative event and decision to move on. So Anne, thank you for your note. You say a serious desire to lose weight and eat healthy and incorporate daily exercise, changing my lifestyle, seeing some results and feeling better has helped it to stick. Okay, thank you. So vision and will. Now, another question for you. So it looks like what some of you are kind of pointing to is that that somehow there's some sort of decision that's made, you know, to actually move on, or that there's, you know, where we have a strong desire and a wish for something to change, or a vision of that, and then also that we then use our will in order to make that happen. And I think what's really interesting about that is that if we really start to look at that and to explore that, often what we'll see is that we can have a vision for what we want to change, or a desire for what we want to change, and also decide that that thing is going to change, and yet that doesn't always necessarily lead to the change A, happening, and B, it being sustainable or sticking. And I think often what we see is that when we really look at this, what we're pointing to is that in terms of the human mind and how it works, is that we all have this capacity to realize something. And often what happens is that we will realize something, which really just means one set of thinking, one mindset dissolving, and then another one taking its place, that totally makes sense to us, which then leads to fresh perspective and action. And so often when it looks like we've made a decision to move on, or our desire or our willpower or our vision is the thing that's prompted us to move on, invariably what there always has been beneath that is a realization that's taken place at a deep level within ourselves, that's then enabled that that change to happen. And so what I'd love for us to do today is really to have some realizations and some insights about how you know, what the mind is and how it works. So based on that, we're going to then sort of move into almost look at the what I'm calling the principles that are working behind the scenes of the mind, that enable us to have these realizations and to change and evolve and grow as human beings, and that are really the source of every experience that we have ever had since the moment we were born, and will ever have until the moment we're no longer in a body. And really these principles that describe the mind and how it works are also the true source of calm, clear thinking, and all of those attributes that you all put in the chat earlier. You know, it's the source of our peace of mind, our well-being, our ability to have clear and calm thinking, and to come up with new ideas, to communicate well, and to be in good relationship with others. So Anthony, would you mind going on to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. Next one. Okay, so on this slide you can see that this says that these are principles of the mind and how it works. Now I'm just going to clear up a bit on what I mean, or clarify what I mean by principles. So in the way that I'm using the word principle, I'm meaning something that's foundational to how something works. So an analogy, I guess, is the gravity. So the principle of gravity, and it's an invisible law or force of nature that's working whether we are aware of it or not. Gravity is always there and it's always working. It's consistent. So if, you know, if I drop this pen 100 times, 100 times it's going to fall, and it's universal. So it doesn't matter who's holding this pen, and dropping it, it's always going to fall. So that's what I mean by principles. And also just to say that whatever I'm sharing with you now is not really for you to kind of believe, you know, so this isn't a theory that I'm sharing with you. I'd love for you to go into your own experience and see if this makes sense to you. So try it out and see if you can see this for yourself, because in doing that, that's where you're going to potentially then have your own realization about what this is and what it means for you. Okay. So if you think about what we experience as human beings and how that works, so the mechanics of the mind, in order for any human being to have any experience, there needs to be something that's powering that, something that's alive, that's creating that and making that possible. So what we're suggesting is that behind me and my life is an intelligent source that's creating and sustaining everything. So if we look at our body, for example, there's an intelligence to that's created the body, that's keeping it alive, that's, you know, beating our heart, that's digesting our food. When we cut ourselves, for example, you know, that cut will start to heal. So there's an intelligence to that, to the body, to nature, I guess, that's making that all happen. You know, and the body is one example. You know, that same intelligence we see out in nature and in the universe. You know, it's what keeps the planet spinning. It's what has plants and flowers turn towards the sun. It's what has birds know, you know, where to migrate and how to do that. So that intelligent source behind life. So that's the first thing. That's the first principle, and that's always there and enables us to have an experience. The second principle I'm going to talk about, well, the second and third, is that that there's an awareness. So again, check this out in your own experience. We are aware, we have the capacity as human beings to know experiences. So we have the capacity to be aware of experience and to know that. Okay. And then the third principle is what we're calling the creative principle. So there is this process of creation that takes place. So this, you know, behind the scenes of the mind, there's an intelligent source that's sourcing that, that is aware and that makes all of life possible through a process of creation. Now, the result of all of those three principles coming together is me as a human being and a body, and everything that I am experiencing through my thoughts, my feelings, everything that I sense internally, and also my perceptions of the outside world as well. And all of that is taking place through the mind, through these invisible laws of nature, on a moment by moment basis, being created and showing up in our minds as the experiences that we're having. So I just want to check in, because I've been talking for a little while, and just ask people if that makes sense and if there are any questions at this point. So in a way, what we're saying is that there are these invisible principles and processes of the mind are constantly working behind the scenes, creating our moment-to-moment experience. And an analogy that I sometimes use is, I don't know if anyone's ever tried out a VR headset. My youngest son, who's 10, has one for his PlayStation, and I had to go on it the other day, which was really quite interesting. So you put this headset on, and just your whole experience is whatever is showing up in this headset, and obviously it looks very real, and you kind of get totally caught up in it. Now, so if I use that as an analogy of how the mind works, so in order for the headset to work, there is a power source, whether that's a battery or whether it's plugged into the PlayStation or into the power socket. So there's an energy that's coming through that's sourcing the whole thing. Now, assuming that this headset is aware, right? So there's an awareness, there's a light in the headset that illuminates the whatever's playing on the headset or through the headset, that makes it real and alive, and we can know that. So that would be the awareness principle, is the light in the headset that allows us to kind of see what's there. And then the third principle, the creative principle, is whatever is showing up in the vision of the headset. So the one I was doing the other day, so my son was playing a game, and you had to sort of duck and dive across things, and I didn't realize, because I'd never used it before, that actually I didn't have to run. I just had to move in a really small way, and the headset would respond quite quickly. And the thing about it was that I got so caught up in the in the reality of the VR headset and what was kind of showing, that I started hurling myself towards the television, trying to avoid something that was falling in my way. And I completely, forgot where I was, and that there was a coffee table in front of me. And thankfully, my son sort of caught me in time, and I didn't, run straight into it. But in a way, the reason I'd say that is because that is how our reality is created. It's almost like, we are wearing a headset that we can't actually take off, and whatever is showing up in the mind is what we experience, whether that be thoughts, feelings, what we're sensing, what we're perceiving. It's all happening through this creative process that, like a headset, looks and feels very, very real. And now there's a reason why it has to look and feel real, because if it didn't look and feel real, we probably wouldn't survive very long in this world. But often what can happen is that we kind of, I suppose, don't realize that whatever we are experiencing, whatever's showing up in the mind, is actually a creation of the mind, and that it is not necessarily the truth of what is actually happening in the world. I'll just stop for a moment, because I've seen a question from Andy. So Andy, you're asking, is this the subconscious processing of the things around us and within us to create our reality? So there are things out there in the world and around us, and that there is sort of data, for example, that our eyes are taking in light waves and our ears are taking in sound waves. But the creation of whatever we're experiencing is not taking place from the outside. It's all taking place through the processes of the mind. And I guess it depends on what you mean subconscious. Subconscious perhaps in the way that it's invisible to us. The process of creation is not something that we are actively doing or particularly aware of. It's invisible to us and it's just occurring. You know, in the same way that, you know, our food, our digestive system will be digesting our food, and that's just a process that's happening without us doing anything about it, then that's, you know, that's the same thing. So hopefully, Andy, that answers your question somewhat. So if we could just move on to the next slide, Anthony. So as I was saying, part of kind of what gets us, I suppose, a bit stuck in terms of not being able to think clearly or access all of those qualities that you guys came up with in the beginning. You know, so when I asked you about, you know, to think of a time when you felt peaceful on the inside and you were in flow, you know, a lot of you sort of said that you felt calm, clear thinking, you know, you were present, you felt energized, and that those qualities just showed up. Now, what I'm suggesting to you is that those qualities are inherently present in us. So there's something that we don't really need to go and get or do anything to achieve. But when our mind is at rest, those qualities seem to naturally show up. And what I've just done in the last slide is explain to you a bit about what's creating our experience in any moment, the functionality, how that works. Now, the other thing to sort of say is that most of us are living in and experiencing, I suppose, a misunderstanding of where our experience is really coming from. So I wonder for how many of you it looks like the situation that's happening in the world right now is causing your feelings of stress, worry, anxiety, maybe inability to think clearly about the future or about what you might need to do right now. So would that be the case? Maybe if you can answer in the chat. So does it look like the situation, people, circumstances, what's going on in the world is creating the experience that you're having, whatever that might be? So Anthony, you're saying the situation in the world is not creating the experience for them. And that's really insightful, because I guess what we're doing often is living in that misunderstanding of, and you're absolutely right, Anthony, that actually thoughts, our thoughts and our feelings and whatever we're experiencing comes from whatever's going on. So, you know, there's uncertainty in the world about the economy or my job, therefore I feel stressed. Or, you know, that person spoke rudely to me and that's why I'm upset. And I would invite you to really look at that, because it's so ingrained in culturally how we experience things and what we think about where that comes from. But on one level, so if we think back to what we were talking about in the last slide in terms of where our experience is really coming from, it isn't being caused by anything other than that moment-to-moment creation of our thoughts and feelings from the inside out. So that creative process is the way that we create and feel a feeling of calmness or clarity or whatever it might be. So it's never coming directly from the outside world, although it often does look like it's happening that way. But that's just simply not the way that the mind works. And when we are kind of caught up in that misunderstanding, what tends to happen is that we become less resourceful. You know, so when we're caught up in the misunderstanding, thinking that there is a stressful situation there, or you know, something is happening in the outside world that's causing me to feel or experience what I am, then that tends to really hamper our ability to be resourceful and clear thinking in any moment. So another way of looking at that is, you know, in terms of the VR headset, is when we don't realize that we are wearing a virtual reality headset and that everything is being created from within, and we get caught up in the, you know, the movie that's playing out on that screen, we just, you know, like I did, we just get tripped up and we just get further on that roller coaster, really, of feeling, you know, whatever it is that we're feeling. So if we maybe go on to the next slide, Anthony. Thank you. So what is available to us? Now, one of the other functions of the mind is that the mind is actually built, designed, if you like, to actually function quite well. So, you know, our human system has this infinite capacity to be resourceful and to have well-being. And I guess all you need to do is perhaps look at young children or babies indeed, and see that, you know, when they're, you know, they're kind of without all of the thinking going on, you know, without being caught up in you know, the conditioned conceptual mind, which, you know, as young children and babies, they tend not to have so much. What they have is an infinite amount of resourcefulness and well-being that's naturally there, that they don't need to do anything to get. And so, you know, we've all experienced that. For example, when, you know, if I link us back to one of the first exercises that we did, where, you know, you looked at the qualities that were present in you when you were in flow, you know, that's what's naturally there and available to us. Now, there is, sometimes it doesn't always look and feel like we're experiencing the full power of that. And on this slide you can see a camera aperture. So it's almost like our aperture to this, you know, to this intelligence behind life contracts and expands. And when it's contracted, it tends, you know, we close down and we tend to be caught up too much in, you know, in the whatever the mind is producing, and not able to access so much of the natural resourcefulness and well-being that sits at the heart of every human being, that we don't really need to do anything, you know, to get, because it's already there. So it's almost like it veils it. And then on the other hand, you know, when we're more, you know, when our aperture is more open and we're more in flow, we have more access to, you know, our resourcefulness, to our creativity, to have clear and calm thinking, and, you know, to really be grounded and do what we need to do in any moment. So just the next slide, Anthony, please. I think I'm just looking at the time, so we've probably got about 10 minutes. So what I might do is just skip this one, and let's just have a quick summary, a quick thing on our feeling barometer. Okay, so one of the questions you might be asking is, okay, so well, how do I know where my, you know, where my aperture is, and you know, whether I'm, you know, accessing that resourcefulness and well-being and or not? And what I put here is really point you to kind of look to feeling. So another functionality of the human mind is that what we have built into us is, you know, our ability to feel, right? And so we all feel stuff. We're sentient beings and we are designed to feel. And often what can happen though is that we misunderstand what our feeling is actually telling us. Now, if we think back to, you know, when we're talking about how the mind creates every element of our experience through those invisible processes, one of the things that it's creating is also what we feel. So almost that thought and feeling are two sides of the same coin, you know, we're one system. And intuitively we know this because, you know, we know that, you know, if we're feeling stressed, we can often, you know, feel that in our bodies, you know, we get a physical reaction to that. You know, if we're feeling happy, you know, there's a whole different other feeling that comes with that. Now, the misunderstanding, though, can happen when we think that our feelings are either created from circumstances, situations, or people, or that our feelings are telling us about something outside in the world. So, you know, if we're feeling worried or anxious or stressed, often we can think that it is, you know, that's justified because that's going on in the world, or, you know, there's uncertainty here, or this is happening. But really what I'd point you to look at and explore for yourselves is that actually our feelings are just a barometer of the mind. So, you know, our feelings are giving us feedback on where our aperture is to the intelligent source of everything, to, you know, to our ability to be in flow. And, you know, when we're feeling constricted and tight and stressed, that's not telling us anything about the outside world, or how, you know, it's not telling us whether, you know, we're going to be able to get a new job or not, or it's not telling us anything about what's going to happen. It's purely telling us that we are caught up in thinking that is not helpful to us. So we can back off of that thinking. And really it's just giving us an indication that our aperture to, you know, to the source of everything, to that intelligence is constricted. Now you might then be thinking, okay, well, if I notice that my aperture is low, and I'm not in a good space and therefore not accessing the full potential of my resourcefulness, well, what do I do about that? And again, the thing that I would point you to is to explore, you know, more about, you know, what is it, how does the mind work, and what is it that's creating my experience in any moment. And you'll see on this slide there's a picture of someone sleeping. Now, our feelings don't need fixing or changing. You know, noticing how something works is what helps it dissolve. So in this example, you know, and I think we can all relate to this, we'll be asleep, you know, maybe you have a bad dream, you wake up in the morning and you're having a physical felt sensation of that. You know, you might wake up, if it was a bad dream, and your heart's going, and, you know, you might be sweating a bit or whatever. But the moment you realize that it was a dream, i.e. it was a creation of the mind, what happens is that all of those feelings, all of that, you know, stress just dissolves. You don't need to do anything to actually change that. And so similarly, you know, if we're feeling like we're caught up and we're not really thinking clearly, you know, our aperture is low, the noticing of that and the remembering of how the mind works, where and how our experience is really created, usually has the effect of allowing that to dissolve in the same way that a dream does when we wake up in the morning. So I'm just wondering whether we spend 5 minutes just taking some questions now. Anthony, someone's just asking if we can show the previous slide. I think we can send the slides out.
You mean this one, or do you want to?
I think the one before.
One before? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to just talk about that briefly?
Yeah, I can talk about this one. What this one is showing us is just a representation of. I mean, really, there's only one mind, but there are sort of two aspects of the mind, and you know, the one on that we're calling the impersonal mind is what's available to us, you know, from that intelligent source, you know, that we were talking about before. It's our birthright. It's what we're born with. It's what's naturally present within us. You know, and that's our capacity for realization, our ability to take action through inspiration, our resilience, our clarity, our judgment, our creativity, our sense of purpose. And then the other aspect of the mind is the one that we're not born with, but that develops as we develop an ego, as we develop, you know, as we grow. And we're calling that conceptual mind. And that's where all of our conceptual knowledge and understanding and skills, you know, even our sense of who we are and our ego, all sits on that side. Now, what we find is that when we are in flow, when we're, you know, feeling energized and focused and clear and connected, there's a synthesis that happens where we hit that sweet spot and we're flowing between those two aspects of the mind. And the more that we see where our experience is really coming from, i.e. it's a creation in the moment, the more that we see that, the more we find ourselves, you know, being more in that flow state and flowing between those two aspects of the mind. So do we have some time for any questions?
Certainly have time for, yeah. Oops, sorry. Should we, oh, yeah, your summary slide?
Yeah, so there's a summary there, so people can just read through that if they like, and if you've got any, if anyone's got any questions, if you could just type it into the chat, that would be great. So while I'm waiting for any questions to come through, I'll just run through the summary then. So realizing the upstream mechanics of the mind, how the mind works, can have downstream benefits. I'll let you guys read the rest. Ralph, you've put a question in here. Can you briefly recap on how to open the aperture, please? Well, that's a really interesting question. And as I said in the beginning, normally we spend 2 or 3 days going through this in detail. So it's been a real whistle-stop tour. But the short answer is that, well, there's 2 bits to the answer. So firstly, our aperture actually does naturally expand and contract all by itself. So, you know, and you'll know this for yourself, because there'll be some days where you just wake up and you are just feeling okay and grounded and inspired and in flow, and you just get on with stuff. And there are other days where your space is completely different. So firstly, that happens quite naturally by itself. Secondly, the second part to that question is that the more deeply you understand how your mind works and how these invisible forces behind the mind are constantly creating and shaping your experience, what tends to happen is that opens up the aperture, because you get less caught up in the day-to-day story that's playing through the mind, and that seems to open things up. And a really quick example of that is, you know, anyone who's ever fallen in love, and the world looks different, you know, nothing really seems to faze you, you're not, you know, you don't worry about anything, you just get on with stuff and everything just seems easier. Now, all that's happened is that, you know, you've touched a space where a lot of your conceptual mind thinking has just dropped away, and so you're not caught up in the usual in the usual stories that are playing through the mind, and that naturally just opens up the aperture. So any other questions from anyone? I'm happy to share. There are some books, if some resources, if anyone wants to follow up on any of this. Anthony, maybe we can send some links out to anyone who
Absolutely,
wants to.
we can do that.
Thing.
Yeah, definitely. Super.
Okay.
Rena, listen, thank you very much indeed. It's very thought-provoking, and I like the bit where I have to close my eyes and really get involved in a practical way.
Sure.
Very thought-provoking, and some good questions too. So thank you very much to all the panelists as well.